Warning, in this video, I'm going to discuss using a dark room retreat as a spiritual practice. Very important that you take full responsibility for any spiritual work, including dark room retreats and the subsections of the retreat that I'll explain in this video. If you have health conditions and so forth, if you have mental health conditions, you should speak to your therapist and your family doctor to discuss whether or not doing this type of work is good for you. The mind is a tricky place that is difficult to navigate. It's easy to get lost, and it's easily to enter a state of derealization, which I find to be especially prevalent among young people, as I was one of them a few years ago. So you've been warned about that. So what is a dark room retreat? A dark room retreat is a spiritual practice, a self-development practice, and one of the hardest things you'll ever do if you decide to undergo a dark room retreat. Now, the concept of a dark room retreat is an alternative to a traditional meditation retreat, is an alternative to a traditional Vipassana retreat, a psychedelic retreat, any kind of retreat where you go and you spend 7 to 10 days doing spiritual work for yourself. However, a dark room retreat can be done on your own terms, in your own house, which is exactly what I did when I decided to undergo 24 hours in a dark room where I am not allowed to leave the room and I'm only allowed to do a select few things. Now, if you're into general personal development, general self-development, then this is something that could be useful for you in general. If you may have been noticing on YouTube and various other social media that the concept of doing nothing is becoming more popular now because everything turns into a trend nowadays. Now, this could be useful because doing nothing has a ton of benefits in the society that we're currently in. You see, we're very dominated by entertainment and social media, and our attention spans have been getting shorter. We've been seeing the research on that. And so being able to sit down and do nothing is actually harder than doing stuff. And I know that seems foolish and counterintuitive, but I challenge you to actually take an hour and do absolutely nothing but sit there and stare at a wall if you've been addicted to social media, porn, or whatever else, food. Watch how your mind tricks you into opening your phone. Watch how it tricks you into using the bathroom or doing anything other than doing nothing. However, the dark room retreat is actually more than just doing nothing. I'm going to explain here the 5 things that I integrated into a dark room retreat. And you can do one yourself and you can do it the way I did, or you can pick which of these techniques work for you or don't work for you. Either way, you should probably explore all of them. So the first technique I did, I set forth to do 4 to 5 hours of meditation. Traditional meditation, sitting in the meditative pose as long as I could, and meditating, allowing myself to simply be. Now, of course, if you've been studying psychological development, if you've been studying spiritual development, then you're probably aware of the ego. Now, this is not the ego that we mean like someone's arrogant, they have an ego. I'm talking about the ego. Right, I don't have time to get into exactly what the ego is. You can search online and do your own research on that. I'll probably make a video about the ego in the future. But meditation. So the ego comes in during meditation, and it's responsible for creating your thoughts. It's responsible for making you believe that your thoughts are you. So I spent a few hours, and I'm going to explain at the end how this whole retreat went as a whole. I spent some hours sitting and meditating. These were split up within the 24-hour frame so that I could intersperse the other techniques I was using. And I would do meditation for an hour at a time. The second technique I used was self-inquiry. Now, self-inquiry is inquiring who the self is. My name is Brian. And so I'm to question exactly who Brian is, or rather who I am. Right? Because when we speak, we talk about, oh, I am a professional mechanic. I am a professional basketball player. I am 30 years old. I am tall, right? We use the word I a lot, but self-inquiry is really questioning who the I is. I won't go into detail on that, but that's the other technique I used. You can look up self-inquiry. The third technique I used was concentration. Now, in a dark room, this is obviously a little difficult. I could faintly see the outline of the closet in my room. And so when I used concentration practice, I spent that hour concentrating on maintaining the faintness of the outline of my closet. The fourth technique I used was holotropic breathwork. You can find various videos on YouTube as well with different breathwork practices. The breathwork helps me to relax. It helps release DMT in the brain, all of which would enhance the effects of meditation, concentration, and self-inquiry. And the final technique I used, which I mentioned earlier, was D&W, or do nothing work, where I could essentially just sit there, lay there, and do absolutely nothing. Next, I'm going to go into what I learned during the trip about myself. So one of the main things I noticed was how bored I was. This is to be expected. Of course, if you're sitting in a dark room for 24 hours, you will eventually get bored of doing these techniques. So that was one thing I noticed. Another thing I noticed was, especially while doing meditation and then doing do nothing work, was that I had a lot of monkey mind. So as much as I wanted to remain simply by being, within minutes of meditation, I would go off into various rabbit holes in my head about things I should have said differently in the past, things I should have done differently in the past, stories and fantasies about the future, various daydreams about success, various daydreams about sex. Another thing I realized was that concentration was very hard. I know I mentioned earlier that I did concentration work, but even during the concentration work, I could find my mind not wanting to focus on the object or the sensation that I was supposed to be concentrating on. Beyond the monkey mind and the various traps of the ego, I also discovered some work that I could do on myself revolving around authenticity and confidence, which are two things that are lacking in society right now, and there's a reason. There's a reason for that. Why confidence and authenticity is low. There's something going on there on a global scale. So now the retreat was supposed to be 24 hours. This is what I had set forth. And I'm going to be upfront about the fact that I only completed 17 hours of the 24-hour retreat. I will be doing more in the future, but I'm going to explain why the retreat ended at 17 hours. At hour 12 or so, I started to feel some very intense pain on the left side of my face, which fast forward ended up being being the wisdom tooth that had not been taken out yet. It started growing during the meditation session, and I could actually use my tongue and like kind of feel on the left side of my face, and I could feel my gums were extremely inflamed. The tooth had started growing this way, and it had like started pushing the gums up, and so the pain was like very, very intense on the left side of my face. I stuck it out for another 5 hours of the pain. I tried to get some sleep in. You can sleep on the retreat, but I was unable to get more than like an hour of sleep, if that. And so, to my regret, I ended up opening the door and ending the retreat, opening the door to the room and ending the retreat at 17 hours, where I then went to Walmart to buy some medication such as ibuprofen and Tylenol for the pain. And the 17th hour came about around 5 or 6 in the morning. So I actually had to, the reason I waited even that long was waiting for the store to open. And so that's how the retreat ended. Something else that became apparent to me during the dark room retreat was that my imagination increased. Obviously, when you're not using a phone and you're not able to access distractions, you experience an increase in imagination. I was also fasting during this dark room retreat. When I started the retreat, I had already been fasting for 12 hours. And by the time it finished, I had fasted for about 40 hours. So during the retreat, I also thought a lot about food. But I was doing fine without food, and I wasn't thinking about food for most of the retreat. It was more on the tail end of it. If I had if I meditated and I got lost in my thoughts, like something that happened in the past, sometimes food would sneak in there. Like if there was a moment in my past that also involved food, then my mind would become aware of the existence of food, and then it would become hungry. But the hunger was definitely the least of my concerns during the retreat. I did have water in the room with me, so I was able to drink water during the retreat. I had a bucket so that I could do number one while I was in the room, because I can't leave the room, obviously. I just kind of used my sense of feel to find the bucket. And last but not least, some other insights that I learned about myself during the retreat. And this is the part that's going to be highly personal. Like all of us are going to experience boredom. We may think about various kinds of carnal pleasures during the retreat, but the more specific stuff, and I'm going to get into some of it here for myself, was one, I realized that I was not enjoying life to the fullest. I wasn't, something's amiss for me there. There's a lack of deep enjoyment for life. Now, I didn't get so deep that I figured out the exact reasons or the exact ways in which I can increase enjoyment for myself. Obviously, that's a very personal thing. I think it would be foolish to For example, I know a lot of people, and I've been working out for years, but one of the things, even I'm guilty of it sometimes, we always say, oh, go to the gym, get out, these types of things. But I don't want to get too much into how society plays a role in this. But for myself personally, I noticed that I wasn't enjoying life as much. Another thing that I noticed in general was how much chaos was flowing through my thoughts as well during the retreat. The thoughts I was thinking were very chaotic. I noticed that I have a deep fear of betrayal for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure where it comes from. It does coincide with my attachment style. If you're not familiar with attachment styles, there's 4 attachment styles. Everybody on Earth has one. They are anxious, preoccupied, fearful, avoidant, dismissive, avoidant, and secure. I have the fearful, avoidant attachment style, which makes sense. The fear of betrayal, I believe, is actually the number one fear that a fearful avoidant has. But I have a lot of that. And a lot of it is outside of the realm of romantic relationships. I can think up storms of thoughts from thin air about being betrayed by strangers, by family, by exes in the past, by people I make up in my head in the future. A lot of betrayal. And it's fascinating because there's only you there, and that when these thoughts come up, a lot of people recognize like making fake scenarios and fake arguments in your head. I have that to the nth degree. So a deep trauma around the fear of betrayal, and just trauma in general, just my interpretation of events. Although I am a lot better at handling the trauma now as I'm able to observe the events and not identify with them. But some of them are a little bit more convincing than others.